All right, hi, my name is Jonathan King,
I'm Tiffany Domingo.
and we will be talking about literacy within physical education and the EdTPA. So to begin, Tiffany and I are both gonna talk about our books individually with a little bit of commentary going over each chapter. And at the end of our presentation, we're gonna talk about how this book helped, or in our case, was not very useful in helping us prepare for the EdTPA. So to begin, my book is Teaching for Outcomes in Elementary Physical Education by Christine Hopple. So chapter 1 talks about designing curricular outcomes, more specifically program outcomes, course outcomes, unit outcomes, and lesson outcomes. Moving on to chapter 2, performance assessments, talks about what are exactly performance assessments, how to use performance tasks for assessments, which within physical education we're more familiar with, and then how to use portfolio tasks for assessments. I guess this chapter was useful on portfolio task assessments because I wasn't as familiar with it. And each chapter, as I go on, we'll get into a little bit more detail on that. So chapter 3 goes over safety and participation. This kind of taps into one of the rubrics we'll be talking about later on the EdTPA. This chapter goes over rules and safety, cooperating with others, respecting others, learning about others, and improving your skills. Chapter 4 goes into detail on movement concepts such as body awareness, space awareness, effort, and relationships. This chapter goes into some sample performance assessments, which I'm really familiar with in this area, and then portfolio task assessments as well. Chapter 5 gets into detail over locomotor skills such as walking, running, jumping, hopping, chasing, fleeing, and dodging. Moving on to chapter 6, non-locomotor skills such as rolling, balancing, weight, and transfer. This is a lot of stuff that we do in physical education. I thought the portfolio task assessment gave some great ideas that I could potentially use within my future classes. Chapter 7 goes over manipulative skills such as dribbling with the hands, kicking, punting, throwing, and catching, volleying and striking with short-handled/long-handled implements. They give great activities and examples we can use for this. What I really liked about this chapter was a lot of the assessments that I could potentially use in the near future, which I really did like and I will be using. Chapter 7 goes over fitness. A lot of the information in this chapter I actually use in my weight training class. So it goes over cardiorespiratory fitness, muscular strength and endurance, flexibility, training and conditioning, and then healthy habits. There were some really great performance assessments in this chapter, as well as portfolio task assessments as well. Overall, just looking at the book in general, I didn't see a lot of information that could potentially help me in incorporating literacy within my lessons and applying it to the EdTPA. One downfall I felt of this book was that it was made for kindergarten through 6th grade. And being a secondary teacher and wanting to stay within secondary school, I didn't really find it applicable to the area that I work in. A lot of the information that was in the book, in a sense, was meant for these lower level grades, so I don't see myself implementing them in the school level. A lot of it didn't incorporate technology, which is a huge aspect now of secondary school, and this is the way we use a lot of technology now, such as students will bring their Chromebooks. They're using resources such as web video. They use screencasts. So we're tapping into these different technological areas, and this book does not touch on that at all. Students nowadays are not using the pencil a lot or writing. A lot of their writing takes place on the computer. And in a lot of my physical education class, a lot of the commentary or a lot of work that's being done in the literacy area is done on the Chromebook itself. So I just wish that this book tapped into that technology area and how we as future physical education teachers can implement literacy with the use of technology in our future classes. So Tiffany's going to get in and start talking about her book.
Okay, so the book that I read was Survive and Thrive as a Physical Educator, Strategies for the First Year and Beyond by Alyssa R. James. Now, there's a consensus where these books that we read were more performance skill driven and more about how to establish our classroom and how to run them throughout the year, which I thought was still very helpful. But it definitely crosses subject material that we're learning in our courses this semester. But as far as implementing literacy strategies like Jonathan was talking about, it's lacking in that information. So my the book is divided into two parts: skills to help you survive and skills to help you thrive. So in the survive section, it's talking about um, your first job as a physical educator, starting the school year right, preparing the unit and lesson plans, student assessment and evaluation, classroom behavior and management, and then skills that help you thrive, motivating students, diversity in physical education, which that was probably the most effective and informative chapter in this whole book. Navigating the school as a workplace, developing relationships with parents, and professional development. So, for that first chapter, your first job as a physical educator, um, we were advised to get to know your district, school, and community, understand both district and school-wide policies, and maintain professional relationships with colleagues, including teaching faculty, administrators, support staff. So this is all in how we present ourselves professionally with our schools and in our position as a physical educator on campus. In chapter two, Ready, Set, Go, starting the year right. Um, it discusses managing time and paperwork to avoid getting overwhelmed, making sure that we're setting up our room and materials early to be prepared for that first day of school, demonstrating professional behaviors, including being prepared, teaching and assessing for learning, creating an inviting environment, maintaining order in the classroom, and remaining enthusiastic despite any hardships that we come across. In chapter three, preparing unit and lesson plans, we must plan for the bigger picture. So that universal design or designing backwards is very important in this situation because we want to talk about our learning objectives and we want to really step by step describe what we're going to do and how we're going to get there and teach our students. So what we want to focus on is the overall big picture, what we want our students to learn by the end of the school year. The scope is the content of the full year plan, and then our unit plans are what are the developmentally appropriate learning objectives, what skills do we need to match, or the skills that we need to match the ability of the students in the lesson plans needs to be apparent. For chapter four, student assessment and evaluation, the goal of the classroom is to maintain positive classroom procedures. So the students should know what's expected of them based on rules, routines, and expectations, and this makes assessments a lot easier. So assessment practices must be done in a cycle to monitor student learning. So we should also include allotment for self-assessment as well. And that goes back to the EdTPA for that effective feature in our learning objectives. So traditional versus alternative assessments, those can be skill tests, which I mentioned, is mostly seen in physical education today. We're looking at a lot of performance tests, but now we're kind of pushing through for different ways to measure student achievement in a physical education class. But skill tests are usually used to measure student progress of a particular task. And then versus checklists or rating scales and rubrics, and those are other ways to assess students in a physical education classroom. For implementation, we should include teacher assessments, peer assessments, and self-assessments. And self-assessments, that reflection task also goes along with that effective learning objective that we have seen in the EdTPA. So, for Chapter 5, Classroom Behavior and Management, you should create classroom management plans to ensure efficiency. And that's super important in a physical education class because we're using open spaces and large venues to administer our class. And most of our classes are comprised of many students, so up to 50. So classroom management is very important to make sure that we're monitoring positive behavior at all times in the classroom. So a way to do that is allotting for verbal praise and prompting students and being proactive about it. So not being reactive. We want to make sure that we're looking at a situation and redirecting from any possible negative outcomes or situations in the classroom. When we are dealing with consequences, we don't want to shame our students, and they should be delivered friendly but firm in tone. So we want the students to be accountable for their actions, but we also want them to know that they can be better than the decision that they're currently making. Classroom management style is determining the level of success in the classroom. So the more efficient you are managing your class, the more likely you are to have a very successful classroom. Another thing that I thought was very important was to maintain records of discipline to log disciplinary action. So that is definitely more of a task skill to manage classes. As a physical educator, it doesn't necessarily have to do with literacy, but I definitely thought that that was something important that I can implement in my class, and I did this semester, which was nice. So we are going to switch over and have part two of our presentation because we're about halfway through. So stay tuned for that. Thank you.